On behalf of Centrify, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Cybersecurity Best Practices, the Basics and Beyond. My name is Katie, and I will be your host today. Feel free to post any questions related to today's topic in the On24 chat window on the right side of your screen. We will try to address all of your questions, but if we run out of time, we'll be sure to follow up. All right, let's get started. October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We have invited Andy Smith and Brad Shoemake to join us, talk about best practices for cybersecurity in all parts of your life, not just at work. Andy Smith is our Vice President of Marketing, driving Centrify's product positioning and go-to-market strategy. His expertise spans 20+ years here in Silicon Valley, and prior to Centrify, he was responsible for Oracle's go-to-market strategy for the company's global identity and security business unit, where he successfully launched multiple security cloud services to many millions of users that transitioned customers from on-premises to the cloud. Brad Shoemake is our Director of Corporate Communications here at Centrify, and his focus on insightful thought leadership and increasing awareness about cybersecurity, he communicates Centrify's zero trust privilege vision with news and in the global media, industry analysts, and customers across multiple channels. Andy and Brad, thank you for being here.
All right, great. Thanks for the introduction. It wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't have some technical glitches. So I don't know if you all can see us, but Andy and I are supposed to be on camera right now. Hopefully you can. Hello. But let's go ahead and we'll get started.
If not, we got lots of brilliant things to say.
Yeah, it's actually probably saving the people at home a good thing if they don't have to see me. All right, so. Yes, as was mentioned, it is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and I know that we're coming in right here at the tail end of it. But you know, we thought this would be a great topic to talk about because for whatever reason, it does seem that as we talk to anybody really, it seems that a lot of times people have different approaches to cybersecurity when it comes to their personal life versus their professional life, and this is one of the things that we really talk about quite a bit is you should have consistency, and there's a lot of best practices you can take from each that you can apply to the other. So we're here to emphasize that basically your cybersecurity approach should be treated the same at home, at work, and wherever you are.
Yeah, what's interesting is we typically know what we should be doing. We know what's best for our bank account and et cetera, that we still don't use Cybersecurity Month to prompt you into doing what you know is right. But in not all cases are you actually, there's also some data we're not aware of necessarily. So we know in our personal lives for our bank account and our insurance, do two-factor authentication, et cetera. We know in our professional lives if we're going to, that my IT department makes me do certain things. But one thing that you may not know online here is that when it comes to breach avoidance, that 80% of breaches in your corporate life involve privileged credential misuse, right? And so when we talk about privileged credentials, we're talking about people who have database accounts, right? So that the information that the hackers are looking for is typically in a database somewhere. So you're in a database account, or you are a Windows or a Unix system admin, and I've got access to the entire application stack sitting on an application server, et cetera. Those are privileged accounts, privileged credentials, now privileged into the cloud, et cetera. And the hackers are after those accounts and utilize those credentials. That may not be the way they got in, but eventually they get access to that privileged credential to get access to the data that they're looking for. And 80% of breaches involve privilege, so it's a good place to start to avoid breaches.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really what we're talking about today is three different audiences, right, if you will. So we're talking about people's use in their personal life, their use in their professional life, and then we're talking about some of the threats that they're up against if they're a privileged user. So we're going to look at four main topics today. First is going to be passwords. We're going to look at the expanding attack surfaces that we're all seeing out there. We're going to take a specific look at phishing, and then we'll also look at multi-factor authentication.
Let's go.
All right, let's do it. So passwords. Okay, so I think, passwords have been beaten to death. I mean, everyone knows that the passwords are weak everywhere. People are using the same password for multiple accounts. Password is the weak spot. And what makes it worse is that people are continuing to use weak passwords. So, I'm always amazed every May when it's National Password Day and they always release the top 25 list. And it just seems like they just never change. People are always using the same passwords. And so, what are some of the trends that we see for passwords across personal, professional, and privileged users? And then, what are basically some of the things that we're doing wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. Great graphic here. What's happening? Mostly still bad. I've been trying to get rid of passwords for the past 15 years of my career, and I don't think we'll be successful anytime soon. They're still easy and cheap, right? But on the personal space, good thing is we've pretty much gotten rid of 4-character codes, which used to be fairly standard out there. And the minimum requirement now is that you have at least a 6-character password, and that's pretty much across the board. We step it up a little bit in the professional space, where the standard today is at least 8 characters, and you must use some special characters. It gets a little better if they force you to rotate every so often. But so professional, that's kind of the standard there. And then around privilege access, they're typically long and strong passwords, so that's good. But still, the state of the art might be those are all on a spreadsheet for maybe the root account to a server, and then shared by all the system admins. And so while it's long and strong, shared passwords aren't great. If it's on a spreadsheet, it's not really rotated, etc. So there are better ways to increase passwords. Instead of using passwords, use a temporary token, etc. We'll talk about password management next.
Yeah, exactly. So there's kind of two sides to the coin here, right? So one is people continue to create weak passwords and use them across multiple accounts. But then there's also the management of the passwords and how people are keeping track of them, because we've got hundreds of accounts. You got to keep track of all these passwords. So what are some of the ways that people can be getting past some of the bad practices they're doing and getting to some of the best practices?
Yep, absolutely. The classic in your personal life, right, is the Post-it note on your monitor or under your keyboard, right, with the list of passwords on it. We all know it's not good, but we all do it. I love the classic one when the missile launch was supposed to leave Hawaii and they zoomed in and saw the Post-it note with the password, missile command. That's not good. That's the bad practice. The good practice is use a password manager. They exist. I use Dashlane myself. LastPass, there's plenty of them out there. Use a password manager that will then make sure you have different passwords on different accounts. You don't have to remember them. It just automatically plugs them in. So go that way. So in professional life, it's rather than use your static password or your network login, but then use single sign-on as much as you can after that, because then you're using a temporary token, and so that's much better than a static credential. And then, best practice today is, again, like we said, your IT department should force you to rotate that password, especially if you're using single sign-on, right? You want that to rotate on a somewhat regular basis. In the privilege access world, there is the concept of a password vault, also just kind of similar to your personal password, but a one that does privileged credentials will not only can you store the passwords in there, then the users check in, the admins check out passwords, check them back in. When it's checked back in, that password automatically rotates, etc. So at least use a password vault. And even the step better is, like in professional life, go to single sign-on, go to federation, use a temporary token. That's also, again, a step better than a static password.
Yeah, for sure. The nuclear code one is always terrifying. All right, well, that's a good time to do our first poll question. Should be up on your screen now, so go ahead and select one of these. What we're looking for is, do you currently use a password manager? So Andy, I think, mentioned Dashlane, there's LastPass, there's OneLogin. We're using those to access either your personal or corporate accounts, or both. or are you not using one at all? So just be curious to see what kind of response we get here to this poll. Recently, one thing that's important to also recognize is that password strength also applies to PINs, right? So, recently we've seen a couple of high-profile examples where people had weak PINs on their phones. I think there was a senator last week who typed his in on camera, Kanye visiting the White House. So,
That's right. Kanye. 1111.
1111. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look here at the poll results. At least we're trying to. There we go. So yeah, this is good.
41% using it for both.
Yeah. So it's nice to see that people do understand about, great way to make sure that your passwords are being managed correctly. Use a password manager.
Awesome.
42%. All right, let's move on. So one of the other areas we want to touch on is the expanding attack surface, or what we call sometimes the modern threatscape. A lot of people have heard about Internet of Things. This is, all these connected devices that are now in our lives. I did a count in my own home last week, and I was amazed that the list just kept growing, and I found myself above 20 connected devices in my little, 900 square foot apartment in San Francisco. But it's incredible. So, what are some of these connections that are happening in people's lives? What are these new connected devices, beyond just the smartphone and laptop?
Yeah. So obviously, how many phones you have in your house, but it's amazing when you start really counting up the devices, as you did. It is the Internet of Things, it's connected devices. So, we're talking your Amazon Echo, your Google Home. All the TVs in your house are probably now connected now. Of course, your Wi-Fi router. It is amazing. My Ring doorbell. It just goes on and on and on for the number of things that are potentially entries into your network at home, right? And it's incredible. And we haven't even talked about the cloud apps, right? So those are devices. Cloud apps you're using, your data's up in Facebook, your data's in Google Drive, your data's in some photo storing application, et cetera, right? So all those are the expanding attack surface in your personal life, and those same kinds of things apply in professional and privileged also.
Right. Yeah. Because it's an important point. It's not just devices. People think of Internet of Things and that expanding threatscape. But the modern enterprise is much larger than just devices. So, what are some of the ways that the attack surface is expanding for professional users and then specifically privileged users?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the professional world, it's again also devices. The advent of BYOD was 5-7 years ago-ish, right? But now people are bringing their own phones, their own laptops, et cetera, into work. And then the expansion of really SaaS applications is incredible. We're talking, Dropbox, Workday, Slack, Salesforce. You see all those on your screen like crazy in the professional world. And now moving workloads in infrastructure environments. So you're talking AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Oracle. Now that's when you start to getting professional moves into that privileged access space. So I'm taking what used to be servers in my data center, and those are moving to the cloud, right? So now I've got those workloads running in the cloud. I've automated a lot of processes. It used to be humans logging into servers. Now it's automated processes between DevOps tools that are calling out and logging into each other. Applications are now built with microservices. So what used to be, a single server could be thousands of microservices that need to talk to each other. So there's just much more we need to protect. And lastly, one of the new attack surfaces is big data. We're storing more data than we ever have in the past. So, multiple clouds, automated systems, containers in a new microservices world, and big data, those are all the new attack surfaces in the privileged space.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's a good transition to our next poll question, which is, which of these modern attack surfaces are your organization currently controlling privileged access to? Select all that apply. You can see them all on there. Andy mentioned several of them, if not all of them. And if you're not controlling privileged access to any, go ahead and mention that too. Going back to the conversation about the devices in your home, I mentioned that the list kept growing, and I was surprised that things just kept popping up. And the two that I was amazed by, I kept missing it. I caught it at the end, were one was a Wi-Fi electrical plug-in for plugging like a lamp in. Smart plug. And then my car was the other one. Car's got an onboard computer in it, and it's got wireless connection. So
into your network.
Yeah, it's doing something. So, but yeah, I like the Ring doorbell one, and I'm always amazed when you see the articles about people getting their baby monitors hacked. That's the one that's crazy.
Oh yeah, and the AT&T commercial, right? I hear Steven's phone just came in the door.
Yeah,
visiting your
boyfriend's upstairs. All right, so let's take a look at the poll results for this question. All right, so when it comes to securing modern attack surfaces with privileged access, not surprising, I think, to see cloud infrastructure up there about 80%. DevOps environments coming in around 40%. I think that one's going to be growing quite a bit. If we did this webinar next year, I'm sure it would be a lot higher. Containers, similar amount there. Big data. I mean, so it's good to see that we're, these numbers aren't small, which is good. So we're seeing, a good amount of people who are securing privileged access to these new threat surfaces. All right. So let's move on to the next topic, and it's phishing.
Not that kind of phishing, Brad.
Aw,
it's a nice fish, but that's not the kind we're talking about.
That was a beautiful salmon. I caught that in Alaska last year. All right. So we're going to talk about phishing with a PH, right? So a lot of people are aware of what phishing is. We've talked about how easy we make it on hackers to guess our passwords because they're simple and we're not managing correctly, right? But let's examine some of the techniques that they might use to actually kind of coerce that password out of us voluntarily. So what is phishing and how has it evolved to become more sophisticated?
Yeah, absolutely. It has evolved quite a bit. I mean, basically what somebody's trying to do is convince you to give up some kind of your personal information, right? So they're claiming they're your bank, that they're the help desk, or they're your CEO,
or a Nigerian prince,
right? And in the past, it had really been kind of a spray and pray, right? They would send to thousands of people the same stuff. Hey, this is Bank of America. You need to change your password. They had no idea if they're Bank of America customers or not, right? But they would catch some, right? In these big attempts. And so email in the past had been the main technique to use, but lately it's getting much more sophisticated. So it's moved from email to being text message, to be SMS, and so smishing has evolved. Smishing you see on the screen there, that's evolved. Your browser also, using your browser plugin to phish and pop up messages for you. And one area that's really growing and could get potentially scary is so it starts with phishing. So there's phone phishing, right? So that's basically phishing is voice phishing. But what's moving to video and kind of having deep fakes on videos and impressions, that's kind of where I see the future going. And people are getting pretty sophisticated about making something look real that's not.
Be pretty amazing thinking about getting a FaceTime call from your CEO asking you to go do something, right? So pretty incredible stuff. Yeah, those deep fake videos are amazing. All right, so when it comes to privileged users, or even like your CEO or your CFO, one common tactic that we're seeing a lot more of is spear phishing, right? So what is spear phishing and how is that different from traditional phishing?
Exactly. So spear phishing, rather than kind of this spray and pray, or I'm sending it to thousands of people, I'm going after very specific individuals. And so, who are the targets for spear phishing? It is high value, high worth individuals, et cetera. So it could be celebrities in the personal case. It could be the CEO of companies, right? They've got access. The CFO got lots of access. Hey, you system admins, we just talked about 80% of breaches, right? If they can get access to the sysadmin's credentials, you may not feel important in the grain, but you've got power. And so spear phishing, going after sysadmins, is a real thing. And in fact, another phishing term is called whaling, right? So they're going after the keys to the kingdom. They're going after where the data exists because they know that they can get to those accounts and get to that information much more quickly by targeting the right people.
Yeah, especially when you start to think about these socially engineered attacks, right? So how hard is it to go on LinkedIn and find out that someone just started a company as a system admin and there's your new target for spear phishing?
That's why Q&A, just a question and answer is not a really good form of multi-factor authentication anymore, because I can get online and I can find out a lot about you that you maybe thought was secret.
So that's funny because you just mentioned our next topic, which is
what a segue.
multi-factor authentication, also known as MFA. So most people on the line probably have heard of MFA or multi-factor authentication. Sometimes it's called 2FA, two-factor authentication. It's a little bit of an outdated term now, but this should be something familiar to all of us. We're going to turn this around a little bit because I think everyone's more familiar with MFA in their professional lives. And so this is an example where we can take something we use in the office and apply it to our personal lives. So, what are some of the ways that we can be taking MFA outside of our professional and into our personal lives?
Yeah, it's been very interesting to watch the dynamics of this space change over the last 15 years. At least my first introduction into multi-factor authentication was the old RSA Secure ID tokens, right? And so back then, it was used purely for remote access into your network, right? You logged in your VPN, you used your RSA token, and you had to wait for the 6 digits to change every 60 seconds, and you fat fingered it, and then you had to wait another 60 seconds. So the ease of use was not there, right? It was pretty frustrating to make sure that thing was with you everywhere, and I guess I'm not a very good typer, but to get that in, and so that was probably most people's first introduction to it, and then it really started. Not much change in the corporate world for quite a while, but it started happening in your personal life, right? So that more and more of your bank and your insurance company and your healthcare provider started introducing multi-factor authentication, and it's just really proliferated from there. The ease of use got better because the next advent of MFA was just to send a text message to you, right? So the code came via text message. And that just made the ease of use a lot easier for end users. And now that's no longer best practice anymore. It's moved on from there. We'll talk about different strengths of MFA in a second. But that's kind of how it has emerged. And just to level set again a little bit on multi-factor authentication, there's usually 3 aspects to it. It's who you are. I have to assert who I am, that I'm Andy Smith. It's what you know, so some kind of credential that a passcode. It could be a phrase, a favorite something or other, and then something you have. And so if it's a text message, it's I have my phone. If it's a hardware token, it's the little RSA Secure ID key, right? So something you are, something you know, and something you have. Those are the multiple aspects of multi-factor authentication. And in your personal life, it's really, gone on. And so before we get into privilege, this poll question, Brad.
Yeah. So I think Andy mentioned a couple of these already, but we'd like everyone to please take this next poll, which is, which personal apps and services are you using MFA for? Select any and all that apply, but obviously we're seeing them in some of the industries that you'd expect. So some of the, high compliance kind of industries like banking, healthcare, insurance, things like that. And then we have a few others on here as well that are commonly starting to use MFA. The other thing that's great about having an MFA set up on one of your personal accounts is that then becomes a cue to you if you get a prompt that someone's trying to hack into your account, right? So I just had this happen to me last week on my Comcast account. I got a code on text message that said, "Are you trying to log into your Comcast account?" I said, "No, I'm not." Guess what? I went and changed my password. First thing I did, I logged in my account, changed my password. That was the cue that someone was going after my credential.
And we don't have it quite solved yet because I had the same thing. I get a text that says, "Oh, you're using PayPal." And it was my wife trying to use PayPal, but we share the account.
Yep. All right. So we've got the results up here. So it looks like the...
different poll.
Looks like we might have taken the, there we go. All right, so this was the poll that we were supposed to be asking right now. So which personal apps and services are you using MFA for? Interesting to see kind of a pretty low number for Google and email. If you don't know, Google has MFA basically on all of their services. That includes YouTube. So if you have a Gmail account, if you've got a YouTube account, activate MFA on it. It's going to, help you in the long run. It's not going to be a big restriction on your productivity or usage.
I'm surprised to see healthcare insurance as low as it is, 8.3%. Yeah. I certainly have my healthcare provider and my insurance provider.
But it's good to see about half of you, almost half of you are using it for banking. That's a high priority target. So good for you. All right. So we've talked about MFA. Most of us started using it in the workplace. Now we're moving it in our personal lives. Now, what about for privileged users? Is there an application for MFA there? And where should privileged users be using MFA?
Right. So with privileged users, we like to promote the concept of MFA everywhere, right? So you often think of it for logging in, and that's important. If you're going to log into the server, absolutely, right? Or log into a privileged application, absolutely use multi-factor authentication to log in. But there's other situations in the privilege world where sometimes it gets not thought of, but you can put additional controls in. So when I log into the vault to retrieve my password, I can make sure to add MFA. When I check out or check back in a password, I can implement MFA. And then especially in the privilege world, there's this concept called privilege elevation. So when I log in, I only have this certain level of privileges. If I need to do something special, I have to elevate privilege, and I can request that. And I can, at that time of execution of that request, I can again require MFA. So the more spots you can add multi-factor authentication into the flow, now that the ease of use is better, right? So now that it's just a push notification to your phone, or it's a text message or something easy, let's insert it into as many spots as possible. So the concept of MFA everywhere, especially for those privileged users, those are the keys of the kingdom. Get that in place.
Yeah, and then you brought up a good point too, which is, yes, we fixed the productivity issue. And on the other hand, we've also found ways to make MFA a lot stronger, right? So it used to be, text messages, push notifications. Now we've got, biometrics is coming into play. We've got, hardware keys like YubiKey from Yubico. Google has a really good case study about that, how they use it. They haven't been breached in something like 2 years. So, really much more effective, much less hindrance on productivity. All right, so that's going to lead us to our last poll question. So we just talked about some of the MFA methods. I think some of you may have already seen this poll a few minutes ago, but let's go ahead and put it up again. So which MFA methods are you currently using at work? So it doesn't matter if you're a privileged user or not, but just which ones of these are you using? Select all that apply. If you don't know, there's an option there as well. But yeah, I mean, to me, the biometric one is one that I think is a really interesting one to watch here. If you think about people's phones nowadays, how do people open up their iPhone now? They put it in front of their face, and it takes a picture of their face. That can create a whole layer of considerations, I think, when it comes to MFA. It's like, do you want your face to be the master unlock, and so when you take into account biometrics or MFA, that's one of the things that I think is going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds. Yeah.
I think that it's evolved over years, right? So it started with the one-time password tokens, and then moved to soft tokens. SMS messages were the next thing. They can be compromised with man-in-the-middle attacks. So, not that my advice is, if you're using SMS, don't stop using it. But if you have other alternatives with that application provider, then do something better than SMS if you can. The current state of the art is kind of push notifications to your phone. So if you're allowed to have a phone and it's connected to push notifications, then that's awesome. The ultimate, and certainly for those high profile accounts and things like that, to do some kind of hardware based crypto token, right? So you mentioned YubiKey, there's a couple other providers. There's new standards available in that space from the FIDO Alliance. So move to those hardware keys, to those biometric devices. It is going to be interesting to see if biometrics can replace the password as we go forward.
Yeah, for sure. So looking at some of the poll results here, not surprising to see, push notifications are pretty high.
That's great.
Obviously, SMS is the highest. That's not a surprise at all. A little bit surprising, I think, to see hardware keys is being used less than biometrics, but maybe not.
No, I don't think so. Okay. But it's interesting. With the hardware keys, I think, are an interesting case study. Make sure it's something you have. There can be simple ones that you just have to touch now, but it's always in your laptop, for example. So there are working on ways to make those easier to use.
Okay, I think we're gonna actually go back again, and we're gonna do the previous poll, which was about personal apps and services that you're using MFA for. The options here, obviously there's Google, there's banking, there's social media, healthcare, insurance. So I think they're bringing that up on the screen right now. So, boom. All right, we're back. So yeah, I think some people didn't have the opportunity to take this poll. So if we can ask you to go ahead and take this one again. But again, I manage our social media account here at Centrify, our social media accounts, I should say. And even for me as the master admin for those accounts, I still have to use MFA when I want to access those. So,
yeah, certainly if it's a corporate account, you talk about celebrities, they better have MFA on there. There's been some high profile attacks, right?
Yes, for sure. And then I actually just got a banking fraud alert on Sunday night. That was a lot of fun to deal with too. So guess what I did? First thing, changed my password, changed my username, I changed everything. So whoever's out there using my debit card, you're done. All right.
Do you have MFA on that account, Brad?
I do have MFA on that account. Good. All right.
Too much worry.
So let's take a look at these results as well. So again, which personal apps and services are you using MFA for? All right. So this is
70%.
72%.
We jumped up.
Okay, good. We got enough.
We cut you off earlier.
50% stating Google and email. Okay, good. That looks a little more like it. But again, for half of you out there, again, every Google app and service has MFA on it. So definitely should use that. Okay, healthcare and insurance also took a big jump there too. Yeah. So yeah, you should certainly, there's a lot of your personal information available to healthcare providers. That's a big target for the dark web. So, definitely lock that up if you have the ability to do so with MFA.
For the 9% of you who are not using MFA, you've got a couple days left in Cybersecurity Awareness Month to remedy that.
All right. Yeah, so that's actually a great transition. Thank you, Andy. All right. It is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Let's talk about a few action items here, right, to wrap up the webinar. So first off, it's up to you, right, to be more cyber aware. Nobody can force you to do it. We just did a poll in the UK. 2,000 workers in the UK found that 77% of them don't have any cybersecurity training at all from their companies.
These were business people.
These are business people. These are people working.
Shocking.
So, your company's not necessarily going to make you more cybersecurity aware. So it's really up to you. I mean, so yes, you would hope that there's going to be a certain amount of cybersecurity solutions and processes in place at your work that's going to help keep you and the company more secure, but you can't rely on that. And certainly not in your own personal life. You are the organization. Yeah. You are the ultimate responsibility. And then, of course, when it comes to privileged users, one would hope and think that they would be the most cyber aware people in your organization. May not necessarily be the case. They're probably the people who are going to be the highest targets for cyber attacks. We always use the phrase around here that, cyber attackers no longer hack in anymore. They log in, right? Well, they log in because we make passwords easy and we don't manage them well. And we just don't have good cybersecurity vigilance.
And the other stat we had that only 50%, 47% of companies had a vault, right? Had a password vault?
48% have a vault.
48% have a vault. So yeah, less than half have
Get a vault.
Password vault.
All right. Number 2.
All right. So number 2 is, speaking about that vault, is use a password manager in your personal life, in your professional life, in your privilege. If you're a privileged user, use a password manager. That is important. It's great to have strong passwords, 8 characters, rotate, all that good stuff. But it's hard to remember those things, right? So the only real effective way to have different passwords on different accounts is either to use a password manager, right? Or to implement single sign-on, right? So either of those are good solutions. And so that's for your personal or for your professional. And in the privileged world, really the first place to start is with taking all those shared accounts that we talked about, all the Windows admins share accounts, all the Unix admins share accounts, et cetera, put them in a password vault so that I have to check them in, check them out. They can be long and strong and they're forced to rotate. That's the minimum. But really you want, do that. But even better is to eliminate all those local accounts and do single sign-on in the privileged world, just like you would do in your normal professional world. And so as a sysadmin, as a privileged user, as a DBA, I log onto the network, and then I can also log on directly to that account via single sign-on. So it's using a temporary token. It's not using a static password. That that, even your first initial login will rotate, etc. Temporary tokens better. I can add multi-factor authentication on top of it. And so I eliminate, rather than, if I'm a sysadmin, a Unix admin, it might be 500 Unix servers. And do I have 500 separate accounts, or do I have one account on 500 servers? Which one's more secure, right? Much better to have one account, protect that one account, and then have the single sign-on across everything else.
Yep, exactly. All right, action item number 3. All right, Andy mentioned it. Use MFA everywhere, or at least everywhere it's available, right? So it's not available everywhere, not available on every service or every app. But if it is available, use it, because, let's face it, you have been phished, you will be phished, and you are probably currently being phished. So, again, cyber attackers are looking for the easiest way in. That's weak passwords. Andy already covered off on that. But, the next way in is they engineer a phishing attack, and they're going to come after you. You've got to be vigilant, do all the best practices, hover over links, make sure that you're replying to the correct email address if it's your bank or whatever. But use MFA. This is low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's there, it's available for you, it's included as part of your services. If you're a banking customer or a healthcare customer or whatever, it's available to you. Use it. And again, it's not as obstructive as it used to be. An additional 5 seconds to wait for a push message and acknowledge it, to have that additional layer of security, it's well worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Way easier. That whole used to be this balance between security and usability that used to always battle in the security world. And now they're starting to even out. Like, I can have security and usability. And that's really new in the last 5-ish years.
Yeah. And of course, this takes on the most importance when you're talking about privileged users, right? So, using MFA, as you'd said, at login, at the vault, at privilege elevation, again, putting in these additional layers of security that take an additional 5 to 10 seconds, it's well worth it in the long run.
Now it's your turn to segue, because you just let us.
Oh, hey, look at that.
Our fourth and final action item here is to take a while to stop. And just like you're assessing your personal cybersecurity, let's assess your privileged access maturity. So, no time like the present to take a step back and say, what are we doing? How are we protecting those privileged accounts that we were talking about earlier? So, at Centrify, we look at 4 stages of privileged access security. So it starts with non-existent, which is basically what I started with. Everybody's sharing the same accounts. I may have long, complicated passwords, but they're all written down on a spreadsheet, and everybody's sharing those. Not uncommon. We just said over 50% people are still doing that, right? So, not the best. You probably should do more. Your auditors will find you're opening yourself up. So at least take that first step to vault-centric security. And that's where we talked about, you take those shared accounts, you store them away in a vault so that they have to be checked in, checked out. It will force rotation of those each time, or whatever sequence you set up. That is at least one step more mature than doing shared accounts on a spreadsheet, right? So at least start with a vault. But don't stop there. Especially you're a regulated industry. For your high value servers, you need to move to identity centric. The beauty of identity centric, this next stage of maturity, is I move away from shared accounts and I move to individual accounts. So rather than logging in as root, I log in as Andy. And so there's much more accountability and traceability to what did Andy do on that server in that database as that individual, rather than, hey, 5 people logged in at the same time with the same account. Who knows who was doing what? So much more accountability, and actually makes the manageability even better, because I don't have to put local accounts on all these. We just said, do I want to manage one Andy account on 500 machines, or do I want to manage 500 Andy accounts on 500 Andy machines? The manageability is much less if I can do that federation and do that single sign-on into those machines. That's what we call identity-centric.
Yep.
And the last one got a
not non-existent.
Not non-existent. It's mature on the last one. You are the most mature when you do things like add that MFA everywhere. When you are implementing session monitoring, so I'm actually watching what's going on in those privileged sessions. It's actually video recording. You can use that for forensic analysis follow-up. You send that information off to your SIEM, so that the security team has it and they can correlate it with other activities. So our most sophisticated customers, for their PCI servers, for example, right, that have holding personal information, they are taking that extra step and taking it to that privileged, mature privileged access control stage.
Right. Yeah. So we just did a report back in May about this maturity model. And I think the stat for non-existent was actually about 42% of organizations. So, again, there's a lot of organizations that, haven't even started down the road, and they are at risk. So there's no time like the present, like Andy said, but it doesn't have to only be in Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Any month of the year is a good month to increase your cybersecurity awareness. So, so with that, I think now we're going to hand off to some Q&A. So we've got some questions coming in. So let's go ahead and tackle a few of these while we've got some time. So should I be worried about my SMS two-factor authentication from my bank? Is it bogus? Is it breachable? Should I be worried?
So I think we mentioned it earlier, but first off, it's not. It can be compromised, but if that's all that's being offered by your bank, use it. Right?
It's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing, right? It takes a little bit of a sophisticated attack, right? And so you will weed out all the rookie hackers, right? It's absolutely better than nothing. It's all that's offered. Do not turn it off.
Well, and you're throwing a roadblock up, right? And so again, we're talking about they don't do these sophisticated hacks anymore. They just log in. That's what they want to do. They want to log in. So if you throw up a roadblock, an MFA challenge, they're just going to move on. They're going to move on and try and find the next weak password. We
were just listening to some white hat hackers the other day, and then just said they move on when they see MFA in place, right? So they see even if it's just the SMS, I can find an easier target. So don't turn it off. It can be compromised. There are better solutions, but don't turn it off.
Okay. Next question. How does a password manager work? So we talked about Dashlane and we talked about LastPass. So how do those work? How do you know that your passwords are protected?
Well, so most of them, you can get ones that are online based, right? So that store your passwords online. You can get some that provide you a personal wallet. If you're an enterprise, you can buy a SaaS service, or you can implement something locally. But in general, the ones that do log into web are recognizing that login screen, right? So that you go to there the first time, you're typing in your username, your password, and something will pop up and says, "Oh, do you want to save that in your password manager?" And you say, "Yeah." You save it, saves it away. Then they'll typically ask you, do you, especially if you're filling out, they'll pay attention to two kinds of forms. They pay attention to login forms, and they pay attention to account creation forms. And so when they see you filling in your name, address, everything, and then you say password and confirm password, they know, he's either resetting his or her password, or they're creating an account for the first time. And they'll ask you, the password manager will ask you, do you want me to create the password for you? So you might not even know what it is. It'll plug in a long 28 character, special characters, everything, and put that in, and it'll remember that for you, so that the next time you go in, now the login screen will come up, and it'll say, do you want to log in to Google whatever, or to B of A, or to whatever account, and it'll automatically plug in that long, complicated password for you. So that's pretty much how the personal password managers work, because they're all going into web-based forms. And very similarly in the professional world, right. They're doing screen scraping and they're logging in. They'll get a little more sophisticated because they will integrate with certain applications, Dropbox or specific ones, and they could rotate your password for you. But those have to be specific integrations that are done by those password manager vendors. And then in the privileged world, very specific, similar, except they are much more deeply integrated with those privileged applications. So with those operating systems, so deeply integrated into Windows, deeply integrated to Unix, Linux, mainframe systems, into network devices, et cetera. And they know, the trick there is they know how to do that password rotation from a lot more devices. And so it's not only passwords, they'll store keys and other secrets that are used between applications and between services to get in there. So they're special built for privileged access use cases.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned there that I find comforting is that if you use a password manager or a vault, is that the end user doesn't even have to know what the password is, right? So there's a little bit of additional security in just not even ever knowing what that password is. just adds another layer of security.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You can't be phished.
All right, we got a couple more questions here. So here's a good question. Can 2FA or MFA ever be hacked, like with a spoof number or redirection, if the hacker knows your cell phone number?
So that is one way of the SMS based, right? So it's a man in the middle attack that is utilized there. And the other thing to be worried about, a lot of times you could be almost, it's not really it's a hack, but it's a social engineer round. So they can, if your phone number is known, especially if they know some personal information, they can basically call the help desk and try to reset your password as you, and then put their phone number in for the multi-factor authentication. And so there are ways, if you have a diligent help desk and they've got procedures and processes in place, that shouldn't happen. But I've definitely heard of social engineering attacks where they call up the Google help desk or the whatever big consumer brand help desk, and I'm locked out of my account, I need to get in, I gave this phone to my daughter and I need to use this phone here, without a diligent help desk process, those can be gotten around.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of questions come in now about some of these methods that we're talking about to increase your cybersecurity awareness or your cyber hygiene. And it's important to remember that nothing's perfect, right? So nothing is kind of unbreachable, unhackable, whatever. So none of these is going to put you at 100% protection mode. But what's important to realize is that doing some of these or all of these, it's going to be better than doing none.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, so if people are familiar with NIST, it's a quasi-government organization that puts out standards, and they have a bunch of security standards. And one of them is around authentication strength and assurance levels, basically authentication assurance levels. And so there's assurance level 1, 2, 3. And the more sophisticated that you get, you are sure that is the individual that is asserting that's who they say they are, right? And so you start with basically having passwords in place, then you get to hire to use multi-factor authentication. But if you use a hardware token with its own crypto embedded inside, so those are smart cards, those are the things like these hardware keys, security keys that we talked about, those are currently the best practice or the most the highest assurance level, is I'm really tying that individual, the crypto's insides on in the smart card chip, right? And all the crypto's done in there. So that is a much more difficult hack than anything that is on a server in the cloud somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have time for just a couple more questions here. So one specific question we have here about a specific kind of attack is a pass the hash attack. So the question is, how do you mitigate a pass? Well, first of all, what is a pass the hash attack? How can you mitigate that? Is rotating the password enough?
Rotating the password is good. Basically, you hash passwords, and then they can figure out what it is from there. So rotating is good. Those are challenging attacks a little bit more, but if you rotate, if you use temporary tokens, those are all good ways to get around past the hash.
Okay. Question about are there any password keepers out there that are considered unreliable or risky, and how do you know which ones are best? Well, again, this is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? So how would you find out if your dry cleaners are any good, right? So do some research. Go online, and there's got to be articles out there about the top 10 most recommended or most secure password managers. Ask your friends or your colleagues, what do they use? Go down to your IT department at work and just say, hey, I want to use a password manager, whether it's at home or at work, which one do you recommend that I use? So again, make yourself more cybersecurity aware, do the research, ask questions.
Yeah, I would figure that in your personal life, most of these are pretty secure. I mean, these companies, there's a lot at risk for them to get hacked. It's happened, by the way. I'm not saying it hasn't, but any company that is charging money for your services is likely, has a pretty secure operation. And the bigger brands out there obviously make sense. I would be careful of open source, at least for this type of use. I mean, it could be, but it depends on how you implement it, et cetera. You're in a lot more responsibility yourself then. And then in the professional world, you go out and talk to the analysts, et cetera, right? There's people that build their careers around giving advice around these kinds of applications.
Here's a kind of general question too, just an education opportunity. How are tokens different from keys?
It's just kind of two words: hardware keys, hardware tokens. They're usually, keys can be used in multiple ways. They can be referred to hardware keys, but it also can be talking about the key, like an SSH key, as an actual credential. And tokens can actually be used in a ephemeral, temporary token kind of way. So both of them have a software meaning to it, where they are a soft credential, but they also have both words are used in a hardware-based things too, a hardware token, a hardware key. So it's a little bit, unfortunately, contextual to the conversation that you're having.
All right, I think this is the last question we have time to answer, so it's a good tee up actually for concluding the webinar. What solutions do you recommend for PAM access to attack surfaces like cloud infrastructure? I think we know one good answer, but that's a good way to wrap up the webinar.
Yeah, so an interesting thing around cloud infrastructures is how are you going to authenticate to those workloads you've moved up into the cloud? And it's not the same as when you have those workloads on premises. And so as I move a Windows server or a Unix server up into the cloud, the natural inclination is maybe that I would, say I'm going to move a server up into Amazon Web Services in AWS. Well, I might then create users in the AWS identity and access management solution to log into those servers. Well, now I just created another identity silo of a set of users that are also back in my on-premises directory, Active Directory most likely, or something else. But there's lots of work done over decades to consolidate identities into a centralized enterprise directory. And here I am creating identity silos again out in the cloud. And especially we find with most of our customers, not only they're in AWS, but then they get a great deal from Microsoft and they move to Azure, and then eventually Google's going to, so like most of our customers have multi-cloud environments. It's not just one. And so am I going to start creating all these identities all over the place? And so one of the ways that we're helping customers solve that is with the concept of called brokered authentication. So basically you can try to log into that workload. That workload will go to a service that we offer that says, where's, Brad's trying to log in. Where's Brad's identity exist? It exists back in on-prem Active Directory. I'm going to broker that authentication back to Active Directory, authenticate Brad, send it back, let Brad in. And so in that case, you leave the identity, you leave the account where it is. I'm not creating new identity silos, and I still have that centralized approach to identity management.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of the webinar. Up on the screen here, you can see that if you have any additional questions, there's a way for you to contact us. We also have some links to some assets that may be helpful for you.
Zero Trust Privilege for Dummies.
Zero Trust Privilege for Dummies, yeah. So download the ebook there. And then, of course, if you want to take Centrify Solutions out for a test bin, we've got our trial center, so go visit there. We've got a couple different options available there for you to try Centrify.
Thank you so much, Andy and Brad. What a great webinar. We definitely have more questions, and we'll be following up with each person individually. But we are going to make the recording of this webinar available as well as the PDF of the slides. So look for that in the next day or so. We want to thank you all for joining us. We look forward to having you at future webinars. Check out our upcoming events and webinars, and we'll tune in again next time.